Welcome to All Grown Up Now, a tale of retail, relocation, revenge, reinvention, reckless behavior, really good clothes, indiscretion, infidelity, domestic violence, and one kidnapping. I'm Kenneth D. King, podcasting from my studio near Union Square in New York City. This podcast is another in a series of installments from a novel I wrote called All Grown Up Now, A Friendship in 3 Acts, available on Amazon.com. It's the story of a small-town boy who dreams of being a grown-up and his journey to get there. Each week, you'll hear another installment of this story. I am pleased to announce that BearWorldMagazine.com will be one of the sponsors of all of the episodes going forward. In the last episode, Ken tells of the phenomenon called the Emporium Curse. Episode 14, Escape from the Emporium. The place, San Francisco. Time, mid-1986. The job at the Emporium was amusing, to say the least. Since I wasn't attached to the idea of continuing to make my career in display, and the Emporium wasn't known for its stellar displays, I could relax. The standards there were so lax that I felt I could phone in my displays. As long as there was something on the platform, no matter what it looked like, they were happy. It was like shooting rabbits with a big game gun. My first boss at the Emporium was a guy named Mikey. He was good-looking, a cross between Tom Cruise and Dennis Quaid with a hairy chest, and really stupid. A deadly combination in my book. I'm such a vicious queen that if someone is good-looking and stupid, then God help them. I just can't resist. And I had quite a bit of sport shooting down Mikey. Since I had worked for Macy's and was a candidate for display manager at that, Mikey regarded me as somewhat of a rock star display-wise. Anything I did was regarded as the absolute standard for him. So I got to thinking one day, just how far could I go into tacky territory before he calls me on it? I started small, with little gaffes and good taste. Then I escalated things to where my coworkers, who didn't like Mikey either, started asking what I was up to. During all this, Mikey didn't raise even one objection. So I had to get his attention. My big chance was the prom shop in the juniors department. Could I come up with an idea? Could I? Mikey, I began. You know the Julie Brown song, The Homecoming Queen's Got a Gun? Yeah, he said, eyeing me warily. That's it. What do you mean, that's it? Well, Mikey, we could have musical notes and stars cut out of foam core, along with little pink revolvers, put those on the wall, and then we could dress the mannequin in that cool turquoise Jessie McClintock 50s number they have down there, with hair to death, elbow-length gloves, loads of bangle bracelets, Wayfarer sunglasses, this was the 80s, remember, and a gun. Well, I don't know, he drawled, eyeing me. I had to clinch this, so, with eyes downcast, I said dejectedly, well, we would have done it at Macy's. It took all of 15 minutes after I installed that display for the angry phone calls to begin, and an hour later there were petitions circulating calling for, among other things, my head on a platter. Mikey defended his decision to the store manager, arguing that Macy's would have done it. After Mikey was sent to the Fremont, Gulag, and Siberia store, we got Davy. Davy wasn't as good-looking as Mikey, but just as smart. One day, soon after he started working there, Davy asked me about the prom mannequin with the gun. Apparently, word had spread like wildfire throughout the company. Why'd you do it? He asked. In my best Betty Davis imitation, I waved my cigarette and said, 'Cause I'm bored, Davy. I'm bored. If you ever pull something like that on me, you'll be in serious trouble, he shocked back. Casually, I leaned in close, looked him in the eye, and coolly said, you won't know what I'm up to until it blows up in your face. And you know, I never had to do anything. I just played deadpan, and it nearly drove him crazy. He was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Creatively with my hat collection, I was making headway developing a collection of really extravagant evening hats. Inspired by Fabergé, I built the black velvet boxes, lined in black taffeta, to house each one of these creations, which were wrapped in black tissue. As I said earlier, working in display gave me the ability to build the box and also the understanding of the cachet that good packaging could do to enhance a product. I understood that the sigh of the lid coming off the box, along with the rustle of black tissue, created dramatic anticipation, which was rewarded by seeing the beautiful hat. Believe it or not, the boxes got pressed before the contents did. But the hats got pressed soon thereafter, being singled out in an article on a new boutique called Talayo that just opened on Brady Street across from the Zuni Cafe. I was selling. Not paying the bills, but selling. So, as part of building my business, it was suggested that I start making regular visits to Los Angeles to scope out the kinds of boutiques I would be selling in. Susan gave me my first plane ticket there as a birthday gift with the admonition, "Go get 'em, darling angel." So, during this visit to LA, I sandwiched in a visit to Mark in his new house in Long Beach. Now, I'd never been to Long Beach, but it sounded really nice, a Long Beach. Coming over the hill on the 405 was my first clue. On the phone, Mark had described his new place glowingly as this cottage down the path behind the main house. When I got there, the house turned out to be a shitty little shack, cheaply built in the backyard of a tract house. There was, at best, 10 feet between his front door and the back door of the main house, but yes, there was a path. It went from the chain-link fence gate to the front door. There was no porch. This was a depressing-looking house, but I'm sure it was the proper setting for the life lived within. Inside, I recognized some of the furniture, sadly diminished, from quite some time with no maintenance. The sofa looked so soiled that I didn't want to sit on it. Some of the good pieces that I remembered weren't there. Other of the good stuff that was still there looked patched together, chipped, or otherwise damaged. The door frame to their bedroom was splintered, as if someone had broken the door down at one point. Everything had a patina of stale smoke and regret all over it. Mark and I sat at the kitchen table and talked. The topic of discussion was, surprise! Victor. It seemed that Vic was being sued for sexual harassment by one of his employees at the burglar alarm company that he worked for. Actually, blackmail was a more accurate word. This guy told Vic that if he didn't fork over a large sum of money, the guy would rat him out to his bosses and sue the company. The Japanese bosses had no use for these types of shenanigans and would have fired Victor's ass if they had heard about it. So Mark had sold most of his art collection, including some museum-quality Coptic textiles, at a garage sale to come up with the blackmail money. Why? I asked. Let him get fired. Maybe he'll learn a lesson and behave himself. You don't understand. Well, no, I don't, I said. He's the only one working, so we need this job. Well, why don't you just leave and get a job? You can go anywhere you want then. Well, you just don't understand, he insisted. Thus ended the visit. I felt confused and a bit disgusted and was glad I wasn't him. At least Matt, my unrepentantly unemployed but still good-looking in white briefs spouse, didn't get into situations where blackmail money had to be paid. Even if he had, I sure wouldn't pay it. Sell my stuff to get him out of a jam? Hell no. Yes, Matt was good-looking, and I wasn't paying blackmail to get him out of a jam, but he was getting expensive. Comparing him to Victor set the bar really low, but at the time, I didn't see that very clearly. Or more importantly, I wasn't ready to see it. In that way, I was just like Mark. Summers were not my favorite time while I was with Matt. This was because we got a visit from Pete, Matt's son, for at least 6 weeks every summer. Somehow, the ex overlooked the unpaid child support to let Pete come visit. I'm sure it was a relief for her to get him out of her hair for a while. Now, I don't really like kids, but Pete was a nice kid and I did like him. As I said earlier, he liked me as well, so things went more smoothly than if he hadn't. We did things like have water fights while washing the car, and I tried to treat him as I would have wanted to be treated in such a situation. But the whole thing was really wearing. Particularly worrying was the issue of Pete's mother. I didn't know what she thought of me, or of Matt having Pete living with him and me, namely, what kind of scenario she might cook up in her head. I was conscious of the possibility that she might be afraid that I would molest Pete, or more to the point, accuse me of that, as that's what many people still believe gay boys did. Because of this, I made sure I was always fully clothed around him. He only saw my bare feet, so as not to have even a hint of anything that could be misinterpreted as unseemly. This I had to endure in my home for 6 weeks every summer. My only respite was the trip they would take to Yosemite every year. Now, Matt had this fantasy, operative word, fantasy, that I would go camp with Pete and him and sleep outdoors in the weather. He kept at it, asking me every year, but I would always say that if God had meant for me to camp out, he wouldn't have made the Ahwahnee Hotel. Really, though, I just wanted to have the place to myself. I looked forward to it. Even though Matt became increasingly dependent on my income, Reed was mooching more, I would gladly pay for the trip just to get them the hell out of the house. So you can see why I didn't look forward to Pete's visits. They were too damned expensive. That I did see. The last summer we were together, 1987, when Matt said that Pete was coming out, I didn't get all excited. He got a little put out about this, as I should be glad because he was glad. He had to be told. I'm not looking forward to this because it's damned expensive, I said. During the year, I have one extra mouth to feed, but in the summer, I have two. I don't look forward to having him come because I have to come up with the money for all of this. Remember, I regard one of the positive byproducts of being gay as not having children. I wasn't there when Pete was conceived. You were. Therefore, I don't feel I should have to support him. You're so selfish. All you think about is money, he shouted. It was his standard response whenever I would point out that he wasn't holding up his end of the finances. Right then, I was reminded of what Harry told me all those years ago. When someone uses the word selfish, it usually means that you aren't doing or thinking what they want you to. That summer of 1987 was when everything really started unraveling between Matt and me. To back up a bit, my business was starting to gather steam. In the fall of 1986, I had gotten an agent, and by the holidays, I was selling to a very posh store in L.A. That's where the first rich and famous customers came from. They saw my work at this store and went mad for it, so I had started selling. I couldn't quit the job yet, but things were going in the right direction. What I noticed was that the more momentum my business picked up, the more money Matt seemed to need. Besides having a much shorter commute now that I worked in the city, I was actually making more money by taking a step down in prestige. Since I wasn't attached to a career in display anymore, that didn't matter to me. The extra money was planned for expanding my business, a fact I explained to Matt as I set out my new budget. Strangely, though, Matt seemed to be soaking up the extra money I was netting by the change in job. He stopped paying rent completely, so on payday, I would find myself rent poor and without enough pocket money to buy coffee. Then, after working all day, I would come home to a perfectly tanned Matt who would fill me in on how many cute boys were at the beach. During this time, I still maintained my telephone friendship with Mark. It felt a little sad, as I had seen where he lived and therefore could imagine the sad little shack with the battered and soiled furniture. During these phone conversations, Mark would talk about the taps on the phone. "We're being recorded," he would say dramatically. And he would tell me about the video cameras Victor set up to watch him when he wasn't around. This didn't seem too far-fetched to me, since Vic did work for a burglar alarm company and had access to this stuff. And he had an inordinate fondness, or one could say a fetish, for stun guns and all of that. Hearing all of this made me sad, but I still tried to give some good advice and raise Mark's spirits during these phone conversations. I bumped along at the Emporium, making my designs in the evenings and on the weekends, treating my little business like a second job. Somehow, I got enough money together to keep up the momentum and start selling at the very posh store in Los Angeles. This generated some cash flow, but not yet enough to quit the day job. In the spring of '87, Matt graduated with a BA in music composition. I hinted that he should start thinking about a job, as he would soon be out of school and have more time on his hands. He went ballistic. "Remember, we agreed that you would put me through school, then I would help you get your business off the ground," he shouted.
Uh-oh.
Wait a minute, I don't remember anything of the sort. Besides, I've seen too many movies of the week. They all end the same, where the long-suffering wife puts her man through school and gets traded in for a younger model. "I'm going to get my doctorate and won't be getting a job, so you're just going to have to get used to it," he spat. "You make it sound like I have no say in this," I said. "You don't," he shot back. Right then, I decided to open my eyes. I still didn't want to see what this situation was, but something deep inside let me know that it was really tired of walking around with its eyes closed. Since my business was taking off, I asked Davey if I could go on part-time at work. He insisted that I was hired on full-time, and full-time I would always be. Fine, I thought. I asked. So, I started calling in sick 20 hours a week. Quite to my amazement, this worked out for several months. I used a lesson I learned from Crazy Carmel at Macy's. If you do it big enough, brazenly enough, and long enough, people will just leave you alone and let you do whatever you want. Aside from calling in sick 20 hours a week, there were other things I got away with when I was actually working. If I needed to on my 15-minute coffee break, I would walk out the door right under the time clock, not punching out, to take a delivery to UPS. When I returned, I would walk right in, not punching back in, and go back to work, all under the watchful eye of the security guard. This way, I didn't have to lose my lunch hour. Word went around the store about my plans, and many people were excited for me and wanted to help me out. Helene, the executive assistant to the store manager, volunteered to do all my typing and resumes on company time. When called on it by her boss, she just calmly said to him, "So what are you going to do? Fire me?" Which she didn't do. And then there was Miss Coke. She worked in the linens department. I didn't know her first name. She was Miss Coke to everyone. She'd worked at the Emporium since they'd broken ground for the shopping center in 1952 and had that lilac-white-colored skin that one gets from spending years under fluorescent lights. She liked me. When I'd return from a delivery, if I'd been paged, Miss Coke would give me a heads up as to what time and who it was so I could concoct a preemptive story. One day, though, as I passed by the linen department, Miss Coke grabbed me by the collar and dragged me into the linen stockroom. Pointing to a chair, she shouted, "Sit down!" I was puzzled. Had I done something to offend her? She looked upset. "Get out!" she shouted. "What?" I asked, confused. "Look at me! Do you want to end up like me? You've got something. You have a chance. There's no place for me to go. I stayed here too long. But you have a future and a talent, so get out! I mean it, before it's too late." She was shaking, and with that, she ran out of the stockroom. I felt like I'd just been in a scene from a women's prison film. My departure from the Emporium was rather sudden. It was a couple of weeks before the Oscars, and the very posh store had called for orders of lots of vests. I had a short deadline, so I had to make a choice. Work at the Emporium or further my design business? Which would I choose? There was one complication, though. The personnel policies at the Emporium were reminiscent of high school. One needed a late pass if one were late. At Macy's, we just got our pay docked. And one needed a leave the building pass if one needed to leave before the scheduled quitting time. At Macy's, we just clocked out. Also, if one were sick more than 2 days in a row, one had to get a doctor's note to come back to work. So, this particular week, I called in sick Monday, came to work Tuesday, and needed to call in sick Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday 3 days in a row. This took some thinking, but I figured it out. I would come to work Friday morning and have a relapse. I had a particularly ghastly eyeshadow I used on those occasions, so I could go home about, 10 o'clock in the morning. That would give me the better part of the day to finish my work. As I was standing at the personnel window to get my leave the building pass, I noticed a particular vibe coming from the lady there, and not a sympathetic vibe, I might add. It was the next day, Saturday, when Marshall first called about the studio space she had for rent. I was looking around for a space to rent and let the word out to everyone I knew. That Saturday morning, I got a phone call from Marshall Crossman, as she knew my friend Candace Kling and my agent Brenda, and had heard from them that I was looking for a space. Marshall had just rented a painting studio on 8th Street between Howard and Folsom south of Market and was looking to share it with someone. Was I interested? Of course I was, and immediately went over to see the space. Later that day, I called her back and rented it. And that's how I met Marshall. All day Sunday, I ruminated. Do I quit? Don't I quit? 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 Monday morning, as I was walking up to the building, I was still going through the chant. Do I quit? Don't I quit? Do I quit? Don't I quit? Do I quit? Don't I quit? I clocked in and walked into the elevator. Do I quit? Don't I quit? Do I quit? Don't I quit? Do I quit? Don't I quit? Do I quit? And then in jumped Davy, and the doors closed. He looked at me with the look of complete pleasure on his face, and I had my answer. Davy, before you say anything, I'm giving my 2 weeks' notice. Davy's face fell. It didn't have far to go. He had wanted to fire my ass right there, and the look on his face confirmed it. Well, Ken, I expect regular attendance for the next 2 weeks at least, he said sarcastically, hand on hip. Well, Davy, that's going to be inconvenient because I'm doing a photo shoot of my hats for Image Magazine on Wednesday, and I'll be in just long enough to borrow a mannequin, and then I'll be gone for the rest of the day. So what could he do? Fire me? So I launched myself into self-employment in March of 1987. When I rented the studio, Marshall said that the building owner would put in a skylight for me. It would be a small one, about the size of a hanky. Unless I wanted to put in an extra $100, then he would install something larger. I opted for the smaller one. I don't like spending money I can't carry out with me when I leave. Matt was furious. Why didn't you ask me for the money? He demanded. You could have had a larger skylight if only you'd asked me. Well, I assumed you didn't have any money, which is always a safe bet. If you have money, then why exactly am I still paying all the rent? Besides, would you give me the money to put in the skylight? No, you'd have to pay me back. I can't afford to give you money, he said. That sent me ballistic. What about all the money I've given you over the last few years? You're treating me like a housewife, he whined. I don't get any say in your business. Well, sir, if the shoe fits, I shouted. If you act like a housewife, you should expect to be treated like one. Remember, I'm not the one sponging money here. And besides, this is my business. I don't remember you investing in it, so you really don't have anything to say about how I spend my money to run it. And I don't choose to spend my money on this skylight. It's a business decision, my business decision. My eyes were open, and that's what I was seeing. The final countdown to my divorce started in September of 1987. Matt was, yet again, complaining bitterly one day that I wasn't spending enough time with him. It was a common rant. That and we didn't have sex anymore. I've said it before. It was because he had too much time on his hands being unemployed and all. He wanted to go to the museum, and Thursdays were free. I could at least do that for him. So we went. We were walking down one of the hallways at the De Young when coming towards us was this blonde kid. As he passed, he locked eyes with Matt, and I thought, Matt always had a taste for tubercular-looking blonde boys with spines like cooked asparagus. I'm a brunette with good posture. After we'd walked on a ways, Matt was seized with a strong desire to look at the art of the Middle Ages. Again. Glad to be rid of him, I walked onto the Asian art to look at the jades on display. We agreed to meet up later in front of the building. So we met up, and as we were leaving, the kid came up, or slunk up to be more accurate, and Matt gave him our phone number. He explained that Philippe was visiting from France, and he offered to show the boy around. Right about then, a car drove by, stereo blasting. The song I heard through the open window was Your Cheatin' Heart, or it really should have been. Later that night, I came home from my jewelry class to find the two of them in Matt's bedroom. They were still fully clothed, but Matt was looking at Philippe like a thirsty man looks at water. After a bit of uncomfortable conversation, I went to my room. A few minutes later, Matt came in, wanting to talk. He started, and I interrupted. Just go ahead and do what you want to do. That's what you've been doing all along. You don't need my permission. I had my out. 4 days later, they emerged from Matt's room, and Philippe left, and Matt sat down at the kitchen table. We need to talk, I said. I've been miserable. I would have left you months ago if I'd had a job, he shouted. Well then, guess what, I said. This bank is closed. If you're so fucking miserable, you'll get a job. And I left for work. But not before taking my change jar with me. I also stopped bringing food into the house and started sleeping with my wallet under my pillow. If he was so fucking miserable, then he would also be hungry as well. The meal ticket had expired. It was over for me. He had put into words what I wouldn't look at. Now I couldn't avoid looking at or seeing the obvious. It had slapped me in the face. Matt was hanging around because I was the meal ticket. It was something I had been able to avoid looking at. In that way, I was like Mark. But secretly, I knew it all along. Allowing Philippe to happen gave me both the motivation to finally look at the issue and also the way out of the situation. Even so, it felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. It brought back all of the insecurities I felt about how Matt was so beautiful, and because he was so beautiful, why was he with me? It was hard to swallow this confession that I was just a meal ticket. In my mind, it was a slap at my attractiveness, my desirability, myself. That's why he stayed around, for the support, not because he found me compelling, desirable, or lovable. So, as I did the day I was dumped by Brock all those years ago, I left the apartment with my head held high, not showing a bit of emotion. He had taken so much, while I chose to look the other way, that I'd be damned to let him have this part of me. Besides, as I've said, I prefer to do my crying off stage, thank you. So I went to the studio and had a good cry there, off stage. This all happened on Labor Day. I called Susan to tell her what was happening, and she insisted we go out for chocolate. Darling angel, it's the only way to deal with such things, she chirped on the phone. But heaven knows where we will find good chocolate on Labor Day. We ended up at McDonald's, eating the cheapy hot fudge sundaes. Well, darling angel, Susan exclaimed after we got settled in. Thank God we don't have to go to any more of those excruciating student concerts. Let this be a lesson to you. Marry up. Don't marry someone whose parents bought silver plate. Only marry a man who inherited his silver. Words of wisdom there. Trust her to have the right take on things. She was right, though. When I look back, I was so glamored by his looks that I ignored the red flags. But now that had changed. In the next episode, Ken's life turns into a bad Fellini film. Thanks for listening. I'd like to thank BearWorldMagazine.com for sponsoring this podcast. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Play. If you have questions or comments, you can reach me through the website, which is allgrownupnow.com. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Kenneth D. King, on Facebook at Kenneth D. King Design, or on my main website, KennethDKing.com.